All right. I think we're up. Okay, guys. I'm super excited for this next guest on our podcast. I've known his name is Rich Hydo. I've known Rich for a while, but the best part about this and why he's on here is he's a very dynamic and unique individual. So he right now owns, right? Part owner in a or owner in a therapy. So how would I describe that? So tell me what you do. Let's just start there.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a mental health clinic. I started
Okay.
it. I've got two office locations, one in Holiday and then one in American Fork. And I have a private practice. And then I've been kind of like you were saying, a partner in multiple psychiatric slash mental health agencies over
Yeah.
the last 10 years. And then
Wow.
some other just business ventures and stuff too. So,
Yeah, and I think here's the most unique part because you have your MBA, you're a licensed clinical social worker, you're working towards your doctorate, but you're also find joy and are very knowledgeable in finance and in trading. And I think that's probably the most unique, especially since we're in like this the COVID-19 pandemic. I don't think
mhm.
you can have two better backgrounds, right?
Yeah,
So
it's an interesting thing. Yeah.
yeah, so how did that start? How did you find interest in both?
Yeah, that's a good question. I started working in finance actually. Gained licensure, actually working in real estate. Played baseball back in the day, college, all that good stuff. And one of the ball players I was playing with, his name is Nate Keevan. He's actually back in Ohio now. But he said, "Hey, are you interested in giving up your $12 an hour job to come work for me, doing more of investment real estate, did some development, commercial lending, larger real estate lending with this firm?" And I said, "I don't know, man. Can you guarantee me a salary? Because I got to make sure I can put gas in the motorcycle and pay the bills and still continue school, right?" And
Yep.
so I took a leap of faith after 3 or 4 months of him talking about it, and actually started working in 2006, really when the market was churning, right? I mean, we know just before that last recession and market cycle, I was doing a lot of real estate lending and working in that. And then I had one of the gentlemen who owned the charter to the actual investment real estate bank that I was working for out of Arizona said, "You're doing pretty well. You have your own branch in Fort Union right now. Would you be interested in potentially skipping over, to more of an investment advisor, financial advisor, stockbroker role?"
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so again, yeah, I mean, it took a little bit, right? It took a month or two to kind of wrap my head around, whether that was something that I would want to do. And it kind of ended up perfectly because I was transitioning out of working in real estate lending and that area of real estate and finance right at the end of 2007. And so right as the market started to take a little bit of breath with real estate, I jumped over to the asset management side. And so yeah, I mean, I worked doing that, and so that's really how it started. I
Okay.
was doing an MBA, wanted to work in finance, and yeah.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really cool. So that's the finance story. How did you get into like the social work and that side of things? Because I feel like, especially when we go through like through '08 and especially through now, a lot of people are battling with both, right? How do I handle finances? How do I handle my stress because of finances or because of uh, things outside my control, right? So it's just an interesting path that I think, and I'll tell you, I'll write down this because I want to come back to that, how you took a leap of faith from that hourly wage into the, because I mean, I work commission, but investment brokers and real estate, that's 100% though, right? That's
Hmm.
1099
Yep.
money, right?
110%. Yeah.
So I guess, so the first question, tell us the transition story from that.
Yeah, so that then takes us up to what I started in. I believe I got my insurance and my stockbroker license and stuff around 2006, 2007, early seven. And so I was working. And at the point that I had an opportunity to either go to grad school, and really start my MBA, which I started in 2009, the firm that I was working for in Fort Union, just doing a lot of asset management, the partners came to me and said, we would be interested in potentially keeping you around, for a little while. What we want you to do is we want you to be completely finished with your bachelor's degree, and we want you to jump in and do a master's of finance. And you've got to have your degree done, and you've got to be applied for school by August. And so I know that sounds kind of, like we digress, but at that point, I was enjoying finance. I love the markets. I trade them every day. I enjoy them.
Right.
But I don't know that I necessarily felt fully fulfilled working in finance. I was a single guy, no kids at that point, didn't have a lot of responsibility. And so um, it actually, the actual transition happened. So part of what I was doing was I would work with companies, look at their books, set them up with insurance, investments, but also walk them through the individual financial planning side.
Mm.
In addition to the business planning. And there was a specific individual, I won't say his name, but he's a Hispanic gentleman who actually owns 2 to 3 mental health agencies. He's a licensed clinical social worker,
Mm-hmm.
specifically works with, the Latino population. And I remember it was my second appointment with him. And in fact, I tell this just at the university to students that I work with, because they always say, you love finance. It seems like you know a bit about
Yeah.
it. How'd you get into mental health? And I remember I was sitting across from him and he said, I basically have shown you everything that I can. When you open up your bank accounts, your bank statements, your investments, when you open up and expose yourself financially like that to someone, he said it's more complex than it would be standing here naked. He's like, so I've basically been naked in front of you, and what I want to challenge you to do, he said, I want you to be honest with me and answer me a couple of questions. True story, by the way. I was not
Wow.
expecting this. Yeah.
Wow.
And he said, are you fulfilled in your job? And I said, sure. What am I supposed to say? I'm there on business, right?
Yeah. 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 Exactly.
And he therapized me, analyzed me like most therapists do. And it led to um, a very interesting experience where, after talking with him a couple of times, he just said, man, I think there's more out there than just working in finance for you. Brown folks, Polynesians, Hispanics, I'm Polynesian. He said, there's a lot of people out there that need help, and you could not only use your financial knowledge, but you could also potentially provide therapeutic services. There is a
Yeah.
great need, and he kind of got um, that wheel spinning in my mind. And so as I continued to work with doctors' offices, physicians, psychologists, different healthcare providers, I mean, I really began to notice a pattern. And that is that practitioners are absolutely phenomenal at what they do, not necessarily at finance planning, and understanding how to best protect and also plan for other practices in their companies. And so,
Wow.
yeah, I mean, it's one thing led to another, and I found myself in the Master of Social Work program at the University of Utah
That's
about
cool.
6 or 7 months later, in addition to doing the MBA. So yeah,
Yeah. Wow. So you did both at the same time, or like one after the other?
no, I did them concurrently, and I did not
Wow.
do them both through the University of Utah. So
Holy
there's,
cow.
I don't recommend that. Do a joint program if you're going to go for more than one.
No kidding. Wow. That's a lot of work. I don't think people realize that. I think some people kind of romanticize that idea, like, oh, I did them at the same time, but you have no clue, right? How
It's
hard
a
that is.
terrible idea.
Holy
Terrible
cow.
idea.
That's tough, man. So I think one cool thing that you mentioned in your story, which was like amazing, by the way, is that whole idea of, so that's why, so I just am finishing my bachelor's in accounting,
Mm-hmm.
and I have like a big sales background. And you mentioned that was one of the big things for you, like people had their practices and they didn't know how to monetize or scale those practices and profitably, because you can get too big for your britches if you try to scale too quickly, or you do stuff like that, right? um so do you use that like to help you in your current practice? Do you consult other ways, or I mean, because it's really smart. A lot of people don't realize that, right? Like small business owners love their idea so much that they have that passion and that vision, but they don't take the time to learn about the money and how money flows and how money works, right? Because it's a whole, it's money is just an organism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it can have a mind of its own if you don't if you don't watch it and take care of it, right? So how do you handle with that? Like, tell me more about that.
I mean, I think, and I suppose that's why I'm a little different when it comes to the way that I approach mental health, because I know that finances are a big part of it, right? And
Well, yeah.
so um, I think being able to take a step back and realize that um, for the most part, small businesses, I mean, it's more about the sustainability. So I have tried, at least in mental health, to maybe focus more on a specific sector of the industry
Mhm.
that I want to work in. And when I look at just other partnerships I've been in, that's typically what I have found has been, most successful. Most recently, I was a partner in a PMAD, or a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder clinic that I helped
Yeah.
kind of get going and get off the ground. Was a partner for a little while. And I think specialization was really important,
Yeah.
because it's impossible to be a master of everything.
You sure?
Um, Especially like you're saying, if you're going to go accounting, you're going to go forensic,
Right.
mental health, it's kind of the same thing. It's
Okay.
really knowing the area that you do and you do it really well.
Right.
And then you're able to position yourself in a place where, you become the expert.
Yeah.
So
I, yeah, I love that because you can't just take a general thing, right? I talked to somebody earlier who said the exact same thing, right? Oh, we were doing one project. Well, we had a business and we had multiple stream like people, right? And you realize that if you have, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8 different kind of niche markets, right? It doesn't work. You can't really figure out the one thing that these business owners need, right? Because I mean, business owners are really just, they want, if you're doing like business to business or business to consumer, sales or uh, business, um, focusing on one industry can really make that difference. But I wanted to go back to that jump. I love this. I love these stories when somebody's got like, even if it's $12 an hour, right? Uh, and they go from this fixed income or this wage that you have, and then you got to take a jump, whatever it is, to commission, right? That money can be a really big, you know uh that money jump can just be really hard for people. So how did you do that? How long did it take you? And tell me that story.
yeah, that's a good question. And I think that would be associated and kind of a follow up just to what I was
Sure.
just talking about. But I think I am really big on not just scaling, but also being very realistic and
Yeah.
bootstrapping. I'm not really big on trying to find outside funding sources for startups, right?
Hmm.
And so when I was getting into this, what I did was I told them that I would work, and I did work, and I got my license, and uh, I continued to work a graveyard job actually, which kind of burned the candles at both ends,
Oh yeah.
as I was getting in, because I'm not gonna lie, I mean, I didn't come from a father or parents with an education that owned businesses and stuff like that, and so
Yeah.
the brown side of me had to make sure that I had the ability to still eat, right?
Oh,
And
for
trying to
sure.
take the leap. And so I actually worked graveyard shifts at a residential treatment center for about 18 months as I was really getting acclimated with, working in real estate, understanding the ins and outs of the day-to-day operations, and just
Cool.
growing a portfolio to the point that I grew an office. And so I actually
Cool.
stopped, and I left just that salary day to day. My insurance is paid, working graveyards, which was brutal. I won't lie,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a brutal 18 months.
Sure.
But once I had my production to the point where I was able to open up my own shop in Fort Union, I think
Hmm.
that's probably where the leap came.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
No, that's really cool because and that's kind of like, you have two options if you want to jump like that, right? You can jump and then have, work harder and have the graveyard kind of shifts, or work afterwards, right? To build your plan here and then have some security on the outside. I went right from a 13 hour construction job, um, because my grandpa is Polynesian and he grew up concrete and building houses, right? And I
Mhm.
was like, I'm never doing that again. And then I found myself back in the construction world, and I was like, I got to get out of this. So I just took the leap. But I didn't
Mhm.
have a lot of, like, when I took the leap, I didn't have a lot of risk. Like, if I make it sweet, if I don't make it, I'm not really going to lose a whole lot. Um,
Mhm.
but I also knew that I had to make it work. It was just
Yeah.
that kind of double-edged sword, right? And I just think that I think that that's really cool. I like those kind of stories because eventually at some point in your life, right, you get to that point where it's like, I got to make something, I got to make a decision and I got to go, right?
See, I think there are two things that drives us, right?
Okay.
So I mean, as like a 25-year-old kid, all I wanted to do is get an education, work for the man, make sure that I can, as George Bush would say, put food on my family.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I wanted, and so I think the confidence came from being able to get in to the real estate lending and kind of, playing in that side of finance a little bit. Confidence came. I started to understand the process of what does it mean to really open up a business. What does it mean to run the day-to-day operations? What type of self-discipline do I have to be able to push that type of production to be able to support myself in a home and other
Yeah.
things. And so for me, like that first jump, I mean, it was the scariest. It's why I was terrified to let go. And I did work some graveyards,
Yeah.
3, 4 days a week just to try to keep a little bit of consistency. But I
Right.
would say when it came to getting into mental health and then jumping into my first clinic, because I'd already worked in finance and I knew the process, I understood the books, I understood that really, I mean, our minds are the greatest things that stand in our way of being successful, if we're going to be honest.
So true.
Um, I had done that. I had faced the Goliath, so to speak. And so
Mhm.
I had a lot more confidence
There.
in taking that second leap. Yeah.
Yeah. So if there's someone listening out here who's like want to take the leap, but maybe they don't have all the information, what are your thoughts on starting a business or like taking the leap, right? What should someone do?
You know, so I do a lot of consulting.
Hmm.
Um, Lately, I haven't just because I've been too busy. I do a lot of startup consulting with folks who want to start an investment uh, business, or get into finance and real
Yeah.
estate or get into mental health. And I think the first thing you want to do is understand the most basic process. And that is if you're going to take the leap, um, I don't know that I would recommend leaning on somebody else to set up, to do all your business filings, to set up, all the legal and the accounting things that you're going to need. I think if 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 someone really wants to engage the process, they've got to be able to understand the process first.
Yeah.
It probably doesn't make any sense. You're going to want to edit that out.
No, no,
Um,
no, no. Here, but that makes sense because to me, because like I had a little consulting business, right, where I'm an accountant, and there's a lot of businesses out there who don't even like that word. If I say debit and credit, they run away, right? If I they don't know what a balance sheet is or stuff like that, right? And so then they come to us and we fix them, but a good accountant will spend time with that client and you really get to know that industry, but nobody's going to know it better than you. You're the business owner. You know what assets you have. You know what market you're trying to go towards. And when you get too many hands in the pot, it can really muddy the water, right?
yeah.
So I like that.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, starting small is big. I mean,
Yeah.
you can pay somebody $400 to help you set up your LLC and all that other good stuff, or you can just do it yourself. You can watch some
Yeah.
YouTube videos, you can figure it out. And I think the reason I say that is because typically when you are trying to start a business, you're going to run lean for the first few years. I mean, we know that. I think we talked about this. I think this is kind of two-sided, but E-Business Myth. It's one of my favorite books out of California.
Yes.
There are 5 types of business competencies, right? And for the most part, the baker knows how to bake, but the baker doesn't know how to run anything else with industry, even when it comes to social marketing and running the books and stuff like that. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
being realistic in time frame, if somebody has a goal that they want to start a business, give yourself, for example, it's May right now, give yourself to the end of the year, put that filing in as the clock ticks to 2021 and start to understand what it means to really run a business. Don't completely quit the day job, especially I
Right.
would suppose in the market environment that we're in right now, but understand and really learn how to be able to manage the day-to-day operations. Talk and interview other business owners. I mean, that's one of the first things that I did before I really got into mental health, especially
Mm-hmm.
from an administrative and partnership standpoint. Interview folks that are already in the industry. Take somebody to lunch. A lot of small businesses, they are more than willing to help out individuals who are interested in really joining, right? So I think that's the
Yeah.
first thing.
Yeah.
You just really have to understand the complexities of business. I know MIT has a lot of open source free classes. I mean, there's a lot of good information out there. You know,
Right.
udemy.com, lots of courses
Yeah.
out there where people teach.
Yeah. So that's actually, so I did my whole accounting degree online, and that, if accounting doesn't scare people, like doing accounting without anybody telling you, like without a teacher face to face that you can ask questions to, right, scares people more.
Hmm.
um but I did. You can learn anything on YouTube. You can learn anything on Udemy. There's, I mean, you can, a simple Google search will pull it up for you. But I like
Yeah.
that because you want to start small, because because like I said at the beginning of this, you can grow too quick. And if you grow too quick, that's just as bad as not having enough money, right? Or the worst thing in, in like an e-business or anything like a merchandising would be to sell a product and then not be able to fulfill it.
Hmm.
That's the quickest way to get in real trouble real bad, right?
Yeah.
Or offer a service and, and not realize that you're booked, or not realize that you don't have the facilities or the capabilities to do that, right? and
Hmm.
and yeah, and so I just, a lot of people don't realize that, and it's just
Yeah.
tough. But if you learn it, then then you're just more versatile, right? Then you don't have that, I forgot what they called it, but I read a book once, and he called it, your golden employee, that if you lost, he's got, your, that employee has you by the neck, because if he leaves, you don't have anything, right? You don't know how to
Yeah,
do.
your key employees. I mean, they're the ones, they've got all the institutional knowledge. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And so you want to know it all, right? You want to know like what accounting is, and be able to look at, your finances, and also know the market that you're trying to go towards, right? So I couldn't agree more. And I like the idea of interviewing business owners too, because,
I
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think this is the example that I'd give. So, I mean, I teach as well. And one of the biggest things that I have had just previous students, graduate students and undergraduate students within the last probably 3 weeks reach out is
Mm-hmm.
the number one concept and principle that I tell them is you got to know the market cycle. If you don't know where we are in the business cycle, if we don't know we are,
Mm-hmm.
in the financial market cycle, we know that markets a full market cycle is anywhere from 7 to 10 years. We're in year 11 right now, plus.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're in a pretty difficult economic state, and so we find that
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times individuals want to start businesses when their individual income is higher, right? You've got more discrepant or discrepant. Can't even speak. It's the end of the day.
Yeah.
Uh, we've got more extra income,
Yeah.
right? But more importantly, I mean, the market's doing well, the industry is doing well, and the problem is it's a lot of times when industry has been very long in the tooth
Yeah.
and that market cycle is starting to get exhausted. I mean, that's a very dangerous place to enter. And so, I mean, I tell a lot of folks, including my own students, if you're going to look for an ideal entry point, you're going to wait until we are in the full-blown recession just to kind of start conceptualizing, and you're
Mm-hmm.
going to start buying maybe some of the things that you're going to need for the company at a discount. It's Kmart Blue Light Special. And
Yeah.
then once we start to get outside of that curve via a V or a U, I mean, that's a really good time to start looking at office space and all that kind of stuff. But, I mean, a lot
Yeah.
of people don't want to wait 5 years to start a business. So scalability, like you're saying, is
Right.
you've got to understand the market indicators and cycles at a basic
Yeah.
level.
Yeah. And I like that, I was having this conversation earlier that people just, we live in 2-day free Amazon Prime shipping, right? We live in like this instant gratification world where, like, you know, we romanticize the idea that Jeff Bezos started in his garage selling books on the internet, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we don't we don't understand that that is exactly what happened, right? That it didn't, Amazon today isn't what it was back then, and neither is any good business, right? Any local business, right? We didn't have 10 Mobetas on every corner. He didn't have two he didn't have $200 million laying around. He had to, we had to grow that, you know what I mean? And people they just want that, 2-day free shipping. And it
Yeah,
doesn't happen in business, right? Or finance, right?
that's true.
So,
Yeah.
you said you're a, I know that you're a teacher at the university, right? UVU,
Hmm.
Valley.
UVU, and then I teach part-time at the University of Utah as well. Yeah.
Okay, so U of U and UVU. So I want to pick your brain about this from like an educator standpoint, because we're seeing a huge disruption in learning right now.
Yes.
We can't go to classes. We can't meet face to face anymore. How have you seen from an educator standpoint that the kids are adapting?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I read an article, I want to say it's probably 3 or 4 years ago from the Harvard Business Review,
Okay.
and CNBC has just kind of pushed it on their Facebook and social media, here and there. But it talked about how a lot of face-to-face or on-campus education, I mean, it's going to be cut. It's going to be non-existent. And their guess was, this was, probably 5 years ago when they ran the study, that half of universities and education institutions out there, I mean, they will be non-existent
Yeah.
just with the way that a lot of the virtual market's going. And so I would suppose that with students, it's good. I would suppose a lot of the millennial folks, those that are under 35 or 40, they've taken to it very well. I think they like it because they can wear their
Mhm.
pajamas and be in class. It's like business up top, right?
Yeah.
Surf shorts on the
That,
bottom.
yeah. That why
Um,
not?
yeah, and it's a little bit different dynamic, right? But I
Hmm.
think that this is probably more of a wave of the future,
Hmm.
because you look at the overhead and just the cost of education right now, it is extremely expensive.
Hmm.
And when you look at being able to mitigate some of the academic costs for attending, we know that facilities is a really big one.
Yeah.
And so I think just with this whole coronavirus shift to where, I mean, no university in the state of Utah are providing face-to-face or grounded or on-campus, whatever you want to call them,
Right.
classes. It's a big eye opener that, well, education can still obviously function outside of having to meet face-to-face.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and from my point of view, from like a student point of view, is like I said earlier when we were talking, you can learn anything online. I don't have to. I mean, going to a teacher is nice, but it's almost like they're gonna facilitate the learning, and they're gonna make sure that the competencies, and then but that's what any employer would do anyway, right? Like they would expect you to have the skills to learn on your own, to figure it out, right? Because if college is like, I remember you said this one time, college is, just like a job, you treat it just like a job, right? And I
mhm.
would expect, like, if I'm going to hire somebody I gave them a problem, whatever that problem was, I would expect with some reasonable uh, time, that they could be able to figure it out however they're going to figure it out, right? And so I think it's really cool because even like with the middle schools, like all schools are shut down, right? At least
Mhm.
until the end of the year. um, and I think with like all the schools, they're getting this, teachers are finally and students are finally realizing, like, we can learn, and the main thing of school for me is like problem solving. I can learn debits and credits and I can learn these, but how do I problem solve when I don't know something? I think that's a pretty valuable skill in any industry, right?
Yeah, and I think as an employer, and as a lot of employers out there, I mean, it's not saying that that piece of paper is terminal and it's the end of the line, because realistically, we
Sure.
know that 50% of folks with degrees, bachelor's degrees, work in the field for which they graduated. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, if you're not necessarily going into a terminal degree that's going to result in licensure, I
Sure.
think you're completely right. How capable is the individual with, deductive logic
Mm.
and sticking it out? I mean, there's something to be said, which sounds kind of terrible, but there's something to be said about those long nights writing papers and
Yeah.
doing equations at 2 in the morning because you've obviously reprioritized things over school.
Yeah.
But I would say that as an employee and as an employer, it doesn't stop with school, like you're saying. It,
Oh,
it doesn't. I
absolutely.
mean,
Right.
it's yeah.
Yeah. And I think, well, a lot of people, especially like, if you just hop on Facebook or Instagram, there's a lot of like college bashing, right? Like, And I wouldn't go that far. Like after this, I see the value in actually getting a degree, right? So I don't degree bash or like college bash or anything like that. But I think that what we're seeing with this disruption is just that. Like we're getting some like caliber in people because they have to figure out how to do this. I got
Mhm.
like, and no, maybe if I can't find it on the internet, who can I go to on social media that might know? Or, it's forcing people to like network and get out of their comfort zone, right?
Yeah.
Even though that might not be comfortable for some people, but I personally thought it was awesome. Like my little, brother-in-laws, sister-in-laws, nephews and nieces, and that they're like, man, I can't ask my teacher questions. And I'm like, well, you don't need to ask your teacher questions, right? She's got 50 students, 100 students. You can go on YouTube, just type it in, man. Right. So and that's just what I think. I think that the point of like a degree would be to really learn the problem solve, like the basics, and then the problem solving, and then like, yeah, sometimes like if your employer asks you to do something, it might not take 5 minutes. You might have to do some work outside of being physically at work to get this problem done if you want it that bad, right?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. I mean, there is no Amazon delivery for a college degree, right? I mean, there are probably some degree churning mills like out in the Bahamas or,
Sure.
other places, but
Yeah,
yeah, and so I think it's also very industry specific, right?
I
Manufacturing,
agree.
things of that nature. I mean, we're seeing not just with our president, but just kind of where we are with the country.
Hmm.
I think we're starting to see the need for a lot of at-home manufacturing. So
Yeah.
when we look at, I mean, my dad was his entire life, so was my grandfather, and before that, but blue collar work, I
Hmm.
mean, there is something that's incredibly important about that.
Absolutely.
And when you look at local economies, I mean, it's tough because I notice like with my own personal company,
Hmm.
we're still churning, if not at a higher degree than what we were before the entire shutdown happened a month and a half ago.
Yeah.
But I'm going to tell you, it's a hard thing to find disinfectant wipes, masks, individuals that have certain skills and competencies. Like our office is being remodeled right now, and
Hmm.
it's an
That's
amazing
tough.
thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
And what do you do? So so switching gears just a little bit, because I actually find a lot of interest in like social work. And I love the idea of like the philosophy that goes behind this kind of stuff. Like I went to therapy for a long time and just fell in love with the idea that that there are some things that I can do better, right? So, what have you seen? And obviously, this is a general question, but like because I noticed on Facebook you made a post. Let me look this up real quick because I thought it was amazing. It was like one of these studies I looked up earlier that I'll share with you. But you posted something. You did a study. 900
Mhm.
people, 600
Yeah,
people.
900 people,
Yeah,
just
tell
a
us about.
few
Yeah,
touch of,
go ahead.
yeah. So, I mean, I do a lot of trauma work,
Okay.
and I do a lot of work just with individuals that have experienced loss, whether it's vicarious loss
Hmm.
or, natural disasters and things of that nature. And so I do a lot of trauma work. And it was interesting because a lot of the patients that I work with, I was noticing that just with COVID
Hmm.
being the perception that we were being forced to stay in our home. I mean, it's very self-isolating and it's different, especially for individuals that weren't married. And so I started hearing some very common themes and some common statements that were being made. And I thought, you know what? I wonder if I were to formulate a study um, more along the lines of acute stress disorder, ASD, which is the precursor to PTSD. A lot of the symptoms are the same. It's just
Wow.
right after the trauma or the experience happens. Now, I
Hmm.
wonder what that would look like. And I remember I just finished teaching a trauma informed care class at UVU on Mondays. And right after it was announced that school was going to be suspended and we weren't going to have any more on campus activities,
Hmm.
I there was a lot of acute stress going on with students, right?
Oh, I'm sure.
And then students started losing jobs and things like that. And I noticed that there was more than just fear, just general fear of the future or unknown. And so I put together this study, threw it out between Salt Lake and Utah counties, measuring, you know, are we suffering and are we in general experiencing symptoms that are akin to mental illness, an actual diagnosable mental illness.
Wow.
And it came to be that, yeah, 60% of the respondents, of almost 900 in the state of Utah, um, screened positive through this questionnaire, for acute stress disorder. And the earthquakes have obviously been added to it,
Oh,
right?
geez.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you look at mental health and where we are right now.
Yeah.
There are a lot of reports out there saying that we have not yet hit our peak for mental health response and need, but that's coming in the next 3 to 4 weeks, you know, within the next month or two. And so,
Yeah, I
yeah.
thought that was a big disruption when this whole thing started too, because that's something that I look at just for fun. Like I like the um, some of the big names of like psychology and like social work, like Brene Brown or Amy Cuddy or people like that, right? Um, and do you think like that there is a shortage of like the qualified people that can help people out there? Do you think that the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic is going to change how counseling and therapy and people approach that?
Yeah, I would suppose so. I mean, just to throw a couple things out,
Yeah. Yeah. Let me
as
hear
a
it.
backdrop to the answer,
Okay.
and that would be, from this study that I did. You look at difficulty sleeping, you
Mhm.
look at more like anxiety based or panic based symptoms, so like pounding heart, constricted breathing, fatigue, headache, all that kind of stuff. I mean, gastrointestinal problems.
Mhm.
That is all directly associated with stress and with potentially a trauma or a stress response. And so when you look at where mental health was prior to COVID, what's interesting was, BYU had a conference. I think this was in 2017, and their research team, or one of the individuals that was presenting at BYU, stated or made a pretty bold statement. And he said, it is expected that the state of Utah, in addition to the United States, but specifically the state of Utah, is going to experience a mental health crisis for which we don't have enough providers to
Mhm.
meet the need. And that is going to be within the next 2 to 3 years. And ironically, I mean, we're there right now. We know that at a national level and state of Utah, Utah's fifth highest for suicides, both with adolescents and with adults. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's nuts.
yeah,
So
our rates of mental health are, I mean, it's astounding here in the state of
yeah,
Utah.
it's crazy. And I think that, man, I remember getting worked up about that one time because so I got to volunteer for about a year and a half in the crisis text line.
Mm-hmm.
So people would like text in and we went through their training for, it was like a 6 week training, just as a crisis counselor for the text line, right? Just to cool people down. Like our whole job in the text line, in the crisis text line, was to cool people off enough, give them resources, and then send them on their way. It was a 45-minute text conversation, like at the most, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the one thing that I think I realized, like on this suicide note, was like how little we knew about it. You know what I mean? Like I learned for the first time when I was when I was starting to help this volunteer program, that talking about suicide doesn't cause suicide.
No, no,
It actually helps people. And I
it
remember
does.
reading an article in the, oh gosh, it was one of the big guys. Well, the Wall Street Journal did an article on Utah, one of the towns just around here,
Mm-hmm.
and about how some of they were doing like the suicide clusters, the studies on
Mm-hmm.
the suicide clusters.
Yep.
And I just thought it was crazy. Like people were like avoiding it because that's what they thought they should do. And I was just, it was insane.
You know, this is a huge passion of mine, honestly.
Yeah.
So not only do I have my private practice, but I'm also the clinical director for the UVU Stronger Families program, which is,
Wow.
um, the largest, and if not the largest, one of the largest outreach, um, programs in the state of Utah. And what we have found over the last 3 years and just the data that we're currently collecting is that most individuals don't know how to ask the questions, and they're terrified to ask the questions. It's scary
Yeah.
to ask your child, have you thought, or, are those marks on your arm potentially cuts? Are you burning yourself?
Yeah.
Have
Self-harming.
you thought
Yeah.
about suicide? I mean, parents are terrified. And
Wow.
so a lot of times, the fear of not knowing the types of questions to ask, I
Yeah.
mean, that's usually the biggest hurdle. So I tell people big in the community, look at the CSSRS, the Columbia Suicide Rating Scale. Look at it, understand those 5 questions. It's free. You don't have to be a mental health practitioner to be able to
Right.
talk about it. And it's huge. I mean, there are so many free online trainings, YouTube that we can go on just
Yeah.
to acclimate ourselves to when I hear a friend, a family member, a neighbor, a loved one say this, these are the types of questions I should ask. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think it's just the lack of awareness. Yeah,
Yeah. Which is so bizarre to me because especially in Utah, like you said, we're in one of the highest.
yeah,
We should find ways to be aware. It,
yeah.
it was unreal to me when I heard that. I got so worked up reading that Wall Street Journal. I'll never forget that experience in my life. I read that, and one of the lines was they actively avoided discussing it with the students. Like,
Hmm.
it was just unbelievable. And so in my house and in my friends, I do the same thing too. Like, it's not a bad thing. If you need to ask somebody, it's not, just ask. It's not, and then if you don't know what to do from there, find somebody who does. If you got the
Yeah.
answer, if you got the answer you need, right?
Yeah, and Dalton, I mean, and it goes with trends too. I love that you're
Sure.
bringing this up because when we look again, we'll tie this into market cycles. I
Sure.
swear, social work and finance have way more to do with each other than we might suppose
Which
because
blows my
patterns are
mind.
similar across all planes, right? I mean,
Yeah.
psychology and the way that we think and behave. I mean, that's the underpinning for
Absolutely.
financial behavior and all that. But when you
Mhm.
look at where we are, we know that substance abuse, we know that addiction, we know that domestic violence, and we know that suicide really increases when we fall into difficult economic times. And
Mhm.
I know that we are absolutely, like I said, just with my clinic alone, there's been a huge uptick in crisis and suicidality, in
Mhm.
substance abuse and domestic violence. And
Yeah.
so I think just being able to ask the questions, we're human, right? All of us get
Yeah.
blue. We have tough days, and
Right.
not talking about it exacerbates it without a question.
Right. And I think there's a big cultural thing, right? Like, a lot of people don't understand that it's okay not to be okay,
Yep.
right? You don't have to be happy all the time. I read that book called The Happiness Trap,
And that's a good one. Yep.
and it blew my mind. It was like, yeah, you don't. And so, my wife and my kids, like, that's what we go through with our families. It's okay not to be okay. You don't have to be happy every day. You don't have to have $10,000 in your bank account every day, or whatever that number is, right? It's okay, right? And I think and this is one thing that before I was preparing talking to you, I was like, man, how do those go together? But they really do. And I think one of the things that I was thinking of, and you can tell me if I'm wrong or if I'm on the right path or not, but people just don't understand, like, economics. Like, dips are okay in the market. Like, that's pretty normal, right? It's going to go up and it's going to go down, and you just keep going, right? You prepare as much as you can, and then you keep going, right? Or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean it's expected. One of my favorite principles, which I mean it's from
Yeah.
the pit traders. Obviously, I mean there really isn't a pit in the CME, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange anymore. But I mean one of the most general financial principles: 50% pullbacks, 50% retracements. There is no way that we can continue on forever if
Yeah.
we don't have a 50%. You start at $0 and you go to 100, expect to pull back to 50. That is going to give you the next entry point to breaking through those last highs. And without those, it's called market breadth. I mean, there's a lot of indicators that tie directly into a lot of the stuff in mental health and what
Yeah.
we're talking about right now.
Right.
I mean, the breadth has to come down. It has to
Mhm.
calm. You've got to be able to have the ability to just reassess, reallocate, and then move forward again. And it's
Yeah.
it's mental health. And I use this. In fact, I use
Right.
financial principles in mental health often.
Awesome.
And I
I
tell
love
them,
it.
when we have that pullback, don't freak out. That's when I start to get excited. Like I said, things
Yeah.
around me get cheaper, houses get cheaper.
Right.
But then if it's mental health wise, that's an opportunity to practice a lot of the stuff that we've talked about. And then to
Yeah.
just maybe test the theory. Is it working? And if it's not, then let's go back to the drawing board and figure out what does. Right.
Yeah. I have no problem with like dips, right? Everybody's like, the market's crashing, the market's crashing. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know enough about finance and economics. I know enough about accounting, and so it gives me a little bit, but at the same time I'm like, guys, it's normal. This is an economy is just like money, right? It's an organism, and it goes up and it down and it does its thing, and all we do is we're along for the ride, and we take advantage of it when we can take advantage of it, right?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
you just roll with it. And so I really think that has a lot to do with just this, this not understanding. So if you just in your own kind of thinking, right, what would you say to like, to the effect of like these cultural things that, like, we don't know enough about economics, or we don't know enough about the mental health questions, or we don't know enough about like the coping skills, right? Like what are your thoughts with that?
Honestly, I personally believe that is the number one uh, challenge in not knowing. I should have phrased that differently. The number one challenge is
Yeah.
maybe not knowing where to go, not know where to turn, because obviously, I mean, the more that we come to know and understand, maybe we realize we don't know anything. But it's
Hmm.
kind of hard if you don't know what you don't know when you don't have somebody there to help you out. And so I think that's where like education helps. I
Hmm.
think that's where reading good books. I love how you said. I mean, I know you're an avid reader. I appreciate a lot of the posts that I've seen you put out on social media, and I think just allowing ourselves to understand that, I don't know, just like with the human, I mean, there are five domains to each of us, right? Of the
Oh, yeah.
physical, the mental, the social, the psychological, or I'm sorry, anyway, you got five of them,
I got it.
spiritual, all that good
You're
stuff.
good.
And
Yeah.
so, I don't know, 1% better every day, like my college baseball coach used to say. You just pick something in business, pick
Yeah.
something intrapersonally that we want to work on, interpersonally with our relationships, and you just work on 1% better in one aspect of ourself or our business every day. That's sustainable. That is a sustainable model.
Right. And I think it's just letting people know that it's like okay to not be okay, and it's okay if you don't know, and it's okay if if you feel bad. I read this study one time. I posted this a while ago on Facebook, but it was they did a study. I actually read it in a book, and I kicking myself right now because I don't remember the book, but they did a study and found that, like, so they asked men and women to sit in a room by themselves and or get an electric shock. Like, so sit in a room by yourself for 10 minutes or get an electric shock, right? And it was something crazy, like 60 or 70% of the men took an electric shock. And then maybe 30 or 40% of the women took an electric shock. Un That's when I opened my mind and I was like, man, you really gotta like learn how to be okay with the silence and the inner voice or your inner self, right? Because I also had friends like in college and in like when I went to high school and I went to the colleges for like not draft day. I was watching that, but for like camps,
Hmm.
and everybody would have their music on before like the games or the stuff, and I was like, well, what do you do? And I had this question. I was like, well, what do you do when the music's off? You don't have the music when you're out in the field, right? Or you're on the court or wherever. Or
Yep.
if you're, I even saw people like who were playing music, like have some like pump up music on. And I was like, you don't have the music on when you do that, right?
Yeah.
So, so
Yeah.
in your experience, like, how do you become okay with just being?
Well, I think that's why this unique experience that we're all having with trying to
Yeah.
stay at home and social distance a little bit, we're forced to stay with our thoughts a little bit more. And we are starting to notice the things around us. We're starting to notice the way that we physically feel. Maybe we've got panic symptoms, anxiety symptoms, and
Mm.
we're starting to gain a much more acute understanding of where our mind is and those thoughts that are running just needlessly and nonstop on the record player in the back of our mind that we've been putting off for a long time. And then,
Yeah.
it's, yeah, how do you go about it? I tell people
Yeah.
journaling is one of the best things. That deep breathing, grounding, One of my favorite apps that's out there that I tell a lot of people about is Mindfulness Coach. It's kind of similar to Calm, Headspace,
Yeah.
but it's free and it's put on through the VA. A lot of research
Wow.
behind it, but Mindfulness Coach, walk through one of the many activities on there every day before you start your day, and
Yeah.
start your day with a journal. Start your day with a
Mm.
piece of paper in front of you, and just unload everything that's on your mind, the
Yeah.
things you're excited for, the stressors, the to-dos,
Yeah.
anything that's on your mind, dump it out and decide, what do I need to address and what potentially is just static, you know.
Right. Well, I like that you said that too, because whenever I get too stressed, I start writing things down, and it's amazing. Like in your head, you're stressed about a million things, but when you write it down, it's like one or two, and you're
Hmm.
like, oh, at least that's what it is for me. Like, oh man, I got XYZ, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, all right, let me just write this down in order and I'll figure out the importance. And then I write it down and I'm like, well, what else was I stressed about? I only got three things on here. Like, what, do you see that at all?
Absolutely, yeah. It's one of my favorite activities, and I think in so doing, like you're saying, I think one of the best things we get from that, it's twofold. One, you can circle or put a star next to anything you have to address in the next 3 days, and if that list is robust, you've been procrastinating or you have too much going on, so it's
That's
time to start cutting some things out of your life.
no.
This and the second one, choose to be happy today. So many of us will be happy when I get the degree. I'll be happy when I get married. I'll be happy when my business
Hmm.
pushes 250. I'll be happy if we got to choose to be happy, and we have to be very grateful now with what we have. Because it doesn't, no amount of money, no amount of success.
Sure.
I mean, happiness, success exists between the ears, right? And it doesn't
Yeah.
matter how industrious or not we are, being able to be still quiet and present in the moment with ourselves. I
Hmm.
mean, to me, that's real success. I work with a lot of business owners on the psychiatric side of things. And they
That's
come in
crazy
just,
to hear. That's
yeah,
awesome. That's crazy to hear. You work with business owners on the psychiatric. Tell me more about that.
yeah. So, I mean, I work with business owners. A lot of times it's usually a referral
Okay.
from
Yeah.
somebody they've worked with.
Sure.
But it's amazing how many individuals who run, mid to large sized companies, they're busy. There's a lot going on. You always got stress going on. And it's, again, I mean, always, I personally believe anxiety lives in the future. It's from the future that presents in the here and now. And
Right.
fears from the past, trauma, whatever that looks like, that's behind you. The only thing that you have is in the here and now is breath. So if we're constantly thinking about meetings that we have to do tomorrow while
Hmm.
we're in the shower, we're not
Hmm.
taking a shower. We're not living. We're not present.
Yeah.
One of my absolute favorite recommendations to a lot of business folks that I work with, district attorneys, all those guys, busy, right? A lot of stuff going on.
Hmm.
And John Kabat-Zinn uh, does a really, really interesting and a phenomenal program where, I mean, he'll take you out and you'll go stay with him for a week or two. And it's all about mindfulness. There's a
Wow.
clip from Anderson Cooper on the internet where, I mean, he just teaches us to breathe, to eat,
Hmm.
and to experience and to live in the here and now and in the present. And it's the world we live in is difficult. And I think if you look at a contraction or a 50% pullback, we
Hmm.
are all, and patterns are similar across all planes. We're all absolutely being given an opportunity to just stop
Yeah.
and listen,
Right.
right?
I love that because not a lot of people get that idea of present, right? They think that they got to be always doing something, right? And if I'm not doing something, it's this at least I grew up with it, right? If you're not moving forward, you're moving backward kind of thing. And I don't know
Mhm.
how I feel about that, right? Like it's okay to just breathe and be for a minute. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if you know where you're going, I think you'll be okay, right?
Yeah, but I mean, and the thing is, if we're not, we're our bodies were not made to push at 110% nonstop. It's why we get
Yeah.
sick, right? I mean, we have to
Right.
sleep, we have to eat. It's a part of our existence, and I think we neglect a huge part of ourselves if we put our spouses, our families, our businesses,
Yeah.
if we put things before us and our cup isn't at least full enough to sustain,
Hmm.
we have things wrong. And like I said, I mean, it's you look at mental health, 300% increase since the year 2000 in the United States.
Wow.
And I think a lot of these external stimuli, a lot of the static and the noise around us has a
Mhm.
lot to do with it. We're not still, Dalton. We're not still. We're not
Yeah,
quiet.
it's nuts. I read this. So I love the Stoic kind of philosophy, and it's kind of coming back. Um, but that's the main thing of it, right? You just stillness, like journaling and stillness, and going for a walk, even if it's around the block, and getting outside. Because I did this thing one time. I couldn't do it as much as I wanted to, but I remember going into my room like really early in the morning and just sitting, and I was thinking, right? And I heard about this on a podcast that I listened to before, and this author did the same thing. So I was like, I'm gonna try it. And it was fun. It was funny because the exact same thing happened. Like while I was being still, I was like, man, I gotta do this. I gotta do this. I gotta do this. And you gotta silence that because and be still, because it's like, how many, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, and so did you, but like how many of our so-called problems or goals or stressors would go away, or or do we just make up, like how many of these do we like make up ourselves? And maybe makeup isn't the right word, but how many do we generate on our own that wouldn't be there if we just knew how to be still, right?
Yeah.
Like when I write, like when I think about in my head all the things that are stressing me out, and then I write it down, I only got like one or two.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to, I'm gonna just kind of tie this back into one of your
Yeah.
earlier questions.
Yeah.
So strategic planning, business planning, right? There are always opportunities around us, always, always, always.
Right.
Whether we fail to perceive them is a whole nother conversation. There are always opportunities around us.
Wow.
The problem is, um, when we're looking at starting companies or those of us that are running companies, if a potential opportunity was not in books and it's something that we just want to take or make a knee-jerk reaction, um, very rarely do those things end up well, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if we are not still and if we are not in a place where we are planning and we are properly approaching opportunity,
Yeah.
I mean, it's scary because we'll be willing to throw money, we'll be willing to throw time at a lot of things that
Yeah.
hindsight. I mean, it's something maybe we shouldn't have, uh,
Yeah.
gotten involved with, and it's
Right. Well, and I know that, and so I've had addiction issues in the past, right? But when in my personal experience, that's where a lot of my like addiction started, was like this like squirrel mentality, right? Like I couldn't just, and so
Mhm.
there was a million things around me, and I just had to like throw myself at them, right? And so because you work a lot with addiction, right?
I do.
um
Yeah.
and so that's one of the things that you kind of get caught in these rabbit holes, right? These feedback loops, right? And so what, like, how do you silence the noise, right? How do you still the noise, or
Yeah.
still yourself?
Yeah. It's honestly, I mean, it sounds stupid. There are three or four things we can all do,
Okay,
and they're
get
it's
honest.
primary, it's pretty basic. Um, how do you still the noise? I mean, being able to perceive the cause of the noise is obvious the first thing.
Yeah.
And that's where, like I said, I think breathing, I think, exercise is important, but taking time for ourselves to just evaluate where we are. And if it takes a professional to help us facilitate that
Yeah,
learning, that's a good thing. I mean, if
it
you're still
is.
in therapy 4 or 5 years later, the dude isn't doing a very good job, right? But being able to maybe learn some of those
Yeah.
skills to quiet the mind. And again,
Mhm.
it's the breathing, it is meditation. Another really big thing that I find with addiction, we all have our truth. We all know truth. Truth
Mhm.
is ever present, right?
Mhm.
Um, some people want to call it divinity. Some people want to call it the subconscious. I don't discriminate. I think both are correct. And
Yeah.
more importantly, I think when it comes to stilling the mind, we need to find our truth. And I know this probably doesn't
Mm,
seem like it makes
no,
sense. And
it
so
does.
with a lot of individuals, what I do is I have them, we'll do some guided relaxation, some muscle relaxation, progressive muscle relaxation,
Hmm.
deep breathing, guided imagery, whatever that looks like. And we'll get to a place where, I mean, they're very calm, they're quiet, they potentially could fall asleep on the couch. And we'll come back to, and I'll say, or I'll direct them, ask yourself the question that you feel you need answered. Or if there were a question, what do you most need to know right now? Right?
Yeah.
I'm not speaking this very well, but
No,
a
it
lot of
makes
us
a lot
have
of
a
sense.
burning question. And so I'll have them ask themselves the burning question that I've heard multiple times before. And the first thing that comes to mind is our truth. Everything that comes after that, it's rationalization, it's
Yeah.
trying to justify, or it's fear, it's
Right.
anxiety. I mean, it's not truth. Our truth comes, it's very quiet, it is very potent,
Hmm.
and very often it requires things of us that hard decisions
Yeah.
or maybe a
Uncomfortable.
lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so how do you, I think that's maybe why a lot of us struggle with stilling our mind a little bit,
Hmm.
because the truth that we are running from is more present. It's more, you know,
Yeah.
abundant in times like right now. And so being able to walk ourselves to just, man, I trust myself. I trust you.
Yeah.
So this
Yeah.
is what I need. It's my question. This is my answer. And I'll always ask them, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to honor yourself or do you want to turn away from it again?
Yeah. Because in that book, The Anatomy of Peace, by the Arbinger
Mhm,
Institute,
mhm,
they call it self betrayal. Like, you know what you're supposed to do, and you don't do it anyway. And that's where we lead. That's where we get justification and guilt and these things, right?
mhm, mhm.
And yeah, that's nuts, because it's so true. Like, there is something that, and a lot of people, and then if you think you're not, if there's not a question like that, or you think you're running away, then you got a little bit more work to do, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting
It
because
is. I love it.
therapy, I don't know, therapy is a funny thing because when you look at self-exploration,
Hmm.
um, I don't know. I mean, it is so basic. I know there are
Right.
probably any therapists that are going to listen to this are going to say I discount everything Rich is saying. It's basic.
Yeah.
It's very elementary.
Yeah.
It's, are we taking care of our primary needs? Are we eating healthy? Are we exercising? Are we sleeping at night? And are we honoring ourselves to give ourselves enough time for some self-care, to be
Yeah.
able to recreate who we are every day, even if it's just for 10 minutes?
Hmm.
Recreation. You don't have to go out and play team softball or,
Sure.
cycle with the group on Saturday mornings. It's how
Right.
are you choosing to recreate who you are and the life that you are working toward and
Amazing.
currently living. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. And I know we'll wrap up soon, but I think one of the things that I've seen too is a lot of people have like these uh like transactional relationships, either with like themselves or with other people. Like, they're in this I'll do something if I get something thing. And self-care really isn't about that. It's about just like doing what you feel like your truth, right? Like you were just saying, like, there's nothing else that matters if I'm doing this, right?
yep.
And I just think that's amazing. Well, I won't take up all of your time, but if there are some tips that you could leave us with, I mean, just real quick, anything that you think that I didn't ask, or maybe that you want to just get out there before this is all over.
No, that's an open-ended question. That's a
Yeah,
dangerous question at
it
the
is a
end of a
dangerous
work day,
question,
right?
especially with a social worker, right? Especially with the pep
Exactly.
that can get.
I'm going to throw a pitch to the industry, I think.
Okay,
Just, I'm passionate. I love finance. Dalton,
all right,
you've read lots of finance posts and all that kind of stuff. But I
which I
think
love.
the mental health, and you look at social work, I mean, it's about people, right? And I wonder if the day and the age of us being able to just maintain status quo with neighbors and people, and, I mean, kind of living just the best life, meaning there's not a lot of struggle, turbulence, and difficulty around us. I wonder if things have shifted over the last little bit, right? I mean, it just seems like
Mhm.
things are escalating. And when it comes to being able to contribute to society, being able to contribute to yourself, to your family. The one thing I would say is there is always a need for individuals who want to help.
Mm,
And if you got a bachelor's degree, 3 classes, you take 3 classes, you can get a social work license as a social service
wow.
worker. It doesn't matter if you graduate in economics. There are three classes through the Utah State Doppel, and you can work. You can get a license and you can function. You can help in the community. And then a master of social work. You guys, there's a huge need out there. If there's
Wow.
one thing I would say, there are so many good people. There are so many good families that are in need of someone, um, and there's just not enough resources out there.
Wow.
And
So
yeah,
you said, you get a bachelor's degree, and then you don't have to get a bachelor's degree in social work to take those 3 classes?
no, in fact, here, I'll read them to you because I
Wow.
teach this to students every
Okay.
semester.
Let's
So
hear it.
you've got to take, I'm going to give you the UVU ones because you could take all these classes online, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
Anybody who's interested, and like I said, those of you that are working in other industries, I did it. I still work in finance. I still enjoy trading every day.
That's
Um,
amazing.
and there's a huge need for being able to do more than just pitch a couple bucks to your favorite nonprofit, right? There's a
Absolutely.
lot that we can individual, but yeah, I mean, so at UVU, for example, if you were to take Psych 1100, you were to take Social Work or FAMS 3000, which is Practice One, and then Sociology 1020 or Social Work 3500. You could sit for and you could get your social service worker license at the bachelor's level.
Wow.
Yep.
And then
And
and then just go to a clinic and apply and start helping people.
what it's an interesting thing because when a lot of times we think that you have to have a master's degree or a doctorate degree to get involved in mental health, and you
Right.
don't. There are a lot of very astute business minds out there that have not potentially contemplated the ability to start a mental health agency, to start a
Wow.
nonprofit, and then maybe hire a clinician to
Yeah.
take over like the practice side of things. And so
Wow.
there are a lot of ways to enter, um, you know, mental health, and it doesn't just have to be by getting a license because it's not about going back to school. There's a lot we could do.
Right. Wow. That was probably the most eye-opening thing to me that I might have to consider, because I didn't know that. And I don't think a lot of other people knew, because when you hear that, right, and I'll wrap up, but when you hear, like, when you see that LCSW, or you see that behind some youth, I mean, that before this conversation, I was like, that's a lot of school. That's a lot of tests. That's
Well, the LCSW is a lot of school. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
even without a social work bachelor's degree, you can still get the master's degree.
Okay.
But the SSW, which is the license right under the
Okay.
LCSW, you
SSW.
don't have to have a bachelor's degree in social work. You take
Okay.
3 classes, and a lot of times people have already taken 1 or 2.
That's
So, like
amazing.
over a summer, somebody could be able to sit for and then procure a social work license. And like I said, work part time, start an agency. There's a lot of stuff you can
Wow.
do.
That's insane. That's so cool. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
good. Well, hey, I, it was so nice talking to you. We'll do this again. We'll keep in touch more, but um that's it. If anybody's out there and they got a bachelor's degree, go take those 3 classes and let's get some help out there. Let's help our people out there. Well, that's all that we had for today. And if you have any questions, just reach out to us on social media. But other than that, we'll peace out.